Hey, it's James from 4x4 Earth, and welcome to episode 20 of the 4x4 Earth podcast, Diff Locks and the Uneek cap locker with Jason Locke.
Join James from 4x4earth.com as he learns all there is to know about four-wheel driving, camping, fishing, and getting out and exploring our great country on the 4x4 Earth podcast.
So, welcome back, everyone. How did you go with last week's episode on driving in the snow? Tragically, it's the weekend while we're doing this, which was the weekend I was meant to go snow driving, but the big issue with snow driving is sometimes the sun shines and all the snow goes away, which is really sad. So I am instead at work doing this podcast, which is good, but I would have rather been snow driving. The exciting thing is, though, that we've got Jason Locke here to talk about diff locks. Now, we've spoken about diff locks in the past. Jason is a bit of an expert in diff locks, but he's got some new and interesting news. So, hey, Jason, how you been?
Fantastic, James. Like you said, I'd rather be out in the snow driving. Alas, there is sun.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about Uneek. So the good thing about Uneek is they make awesome bull bars. They made the bull bar on my BT50. What are you doing for Uneek, and what is it that they do?
So I'm the sales and marketing manager at Uneek 4x4. Relatively newcomer in the 4x4 scene in Australia. Only been around, about to celebrate our 4th birthday. But there's a lot of us that have been around the industry for a long time working there. So we make all our products in Australia, right in Bayswater. And we do things a little bit different than the other players in the market. So we actually ask the customers what they want. And we're designing things that are more in line with the vehicle's styling. So not putting farm gates on the front of vehicles like a lot of bull bars you see out there. So a lot of stylish designs, working with all the sensors on the vehicles. And we do a lot of vehicles like Jeep Grand Cherokee that no one else really does a lot of products for. So we managed to export a lot of those back to America, loading up a container for Thailand next week. So we're doing a lot of things out there, a lot different than the other players.
That's actually pretty cool. I mean, especially exporting Jeep components out to the US. I mean, so I suppose the dollar helps with that, but it's also, like, it's pretty amazing that you can export something like that to the home of the Jeep.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think a lot of our philosophy is actually designing products. We're all active four-wheel drivers, even down to the storemen at work and the welders. So we actually put a lot of thought into the products and actually come up with a lot of products that aren't out there. So Jeep Grand Cherokee, for example, we actually have a rear wheel carrier and a rear bumper for them. We have a higher rated roof rack than what Jeep offer on the car, all independently tested. So we do an awful lot of work there on just making what we think is the best products out there.
Sweet. And I think that's one of the things that sort of does differentiate Uneek is that, well, it looks a little bit unique, doesn't it? It certainly doesn't look like the run-of-the-mill type gear that you see.
Yeah, and we find a lot of that. Our customers are looking to not be the same as everyone else and actually put their own stamp on how a vehicle works and performs. So I think if you have a look, my Ranger downstairs, which we're having a look at before the show, has actually got some real different products on it the way it looks, but it all performs and works really well.
It does look very distinctive. I mean, partly the paint job, but all of the, the bumper, all of the way that the whole thing's sort of set out, it looks very stylish, and I'm sure a lot of people sort of look at it as you pull up to them next at the lights. Yeah,
it takes me a long time to go anywhere. My son's football the other day, go to get in the car after the match, I had to talk about it for 15 minutes to the rest of the parents there, which is a good thing. That's what the car's job, and that's what it does. And we love talking four-wheel drives and seeing people get out there in the bush.
Awesome. So, diff locks, what's the sort of state of the industry? What's the history of diff locks up to now?
Okay. So, diff locks we first saw back in tractors, came out in the 60s and the early 70s. So, one of the field days that some members of the four-wheel drive club I'm in, some of the founding members there, they're looking at these tractors being able to drive across paddocks with a cross-axle diff lock, where they could actually get traction and drive in and out of ruts and do a lot of things there that conventional differentials wouldn't allow you to do. So these guys, there was nothing commercially available. They were making all their own accessories. So up in the dairy, up in Narberthong in Victoria, they actually built a prototype, and the first diff, actually they locked the diff, they did one U-turn and it actually broke. But the second diff, when they came back and learning from what they did, is actually still in the front of the son of the original guy's Land Rover. So it's running around, it's in its second vehicle now, been running around the bush now for 35, 40 years. It's actually fantastic. And then we've seen a lot of people go commercial with it after there. So Tony Roberts was the guy. Roberts Diff Locks was probably the first one to commercially manufacture diff locks back in the early 80s, and there was McNamara Diff Locks as well. And both of those guys were founding in the Australian industry and made a lot of diff locks. And both of those actually got bought by bigger four-wheel drive companies. So the Roberts Diff Lock is now the ARB Air Locker. And, the McNamara Diff Lock is actually the TJM Pro Locker. Both very good diff locks out there. But that's a bit of the history of where it's come from. There's always been other products out of the States, like Detroit Lockers and Eden Diff Locks. They came out with an E-Locker in the States, and that's now marketed out of Harrop now as an E-Locker in Australia. So they actually own the rights for the Japanese vehicles and actually producing them all around the world, where the E-Locker was only available for the American diffs. So Harrop have done a really good job there of doing an electronic locker, which goes into a lot of vehicles.
Cool. So that brings us up to today. What's the big change that's going to be happening in the industry as far as lockers go moving forward?
Well, there's a new locker on the scene called the Cap Locker, which Uneek 4x4 has developed. So we've got on our staff, very smart fella, Joe Laban. A lot of the Suzuki guys will know him, and he's been around the industry for a long time. Been a friend of mine for about 20 years. Very clever guy that's come up with a lot of products over the years. And he's actually came up with a concept called the Cap Locker. So it's actually a partial replacement of the factory diff to give you a full diff lock.
So how does it work?
Well, it's an air-operated differential, but it becomes a fully locking diff. So we've got some Suzuki diff locks that are coming out, which are actually a partial replacement. So it replaces one side of the factory diff. One of the reasons Joe's come up with this and why we're pursuing it as well is back in the early days when the Roberts and the McNamara diffs were done, they actually were replacing weak factory components. So you used to get failures of the factory diff. So you used to there were 2-pinion differentials instead of a 4-pinion differential. So we'll supply some notes, James, to go in there to explain this, maybe some drawings so people can look it up on the site if they need to.
Yeah, cool.
And what used to happen, the weak diffs that were in old Land Cruisers and especially in old Land Rovers, the actual factory diff under power would spit parts out of the diff housing. So it'd actually break and you'd lose all your diff oil and cause you a lot of dramas out on the tracks. So back in those early days, you had to replace the whole internals of the diff. But now, everything's gotten a lot stronger and prevalence of 4-pinion diffs and the gear technology's come up a long way. And what we've seen is the vehicle manufacturers do an awful lot of work to make a quiet gear set and a heat-treated gear set so it actually lasts a long time. So why throw all that away to put a replacement diff lock in there? So we can just replace some of those components, can make it a lot easier to install, can bring the manufacturing price down, which becomes cheaper for you guys to actually buy it and put it in your vehicle. And why replace what doesn't need to be replaced? So the Cap Locker is a partial replacement in the diff. And the other exciting thing that really, I think, sets the Cap Locker apart is when the vehicle is fitted with a limited slip diff. So traditionally, with a limited slip diff vehicle, you take that limited slip diff out and to put a full replacement locker in. So you lose a lot of drivability on the road or in low traction surfaces when you wouldn't engage a diff lock. So the vehicle will more likely spin one wheel away from the lights, like on a wet road. You're reversing a trailer up your driveway in two-wheel drive, it'll spin one wheel. With the factory limited slip diff, it would actually work and still give you some increase in traction over an open differential, but you lose that when you fit a diff lock. So we've come up with a way to keep that, enhance the factory LSD, and then with a switch on the dash, through an air compressor on the vehicle, it actually fully locks the diff like the traditional diff locks. So the best of both worlds. You don't actually lose limited slip ability and your drivability in two-wheel drive and in low traction conditions, and then you can still fully engage it when you need it.
So that's a pretty big advancement then. Really, the vehicle's going to be safer when you're in two-wheel drive, and it's a cheaper locker in general.
Yeah, the price, I guess, when you factor in the limited slip diff, it is become a little bit dearer than some of the others on the market, but it's still comparable and nothing too far out of the normal on buying a competitor's diff lock. The main advantage is you gain a lot of traction. And so in the Toyota LSDs, which is our first ones we're doing for the majority of Land Cruisers, so the first model will actually go in a 60 series, 80 series, 100 series, all the 70 series. So it actually maintains that factory traction in there with the limited slip diff. It actually beefs it up and gives you a stronger LSD than what it does factory. And then with the flick of a switch, fully locked again.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something out there. And in the past, I've had the majority of brands of diff locks in my vehicles over the years. My current vehicle I'm building has actually got a Detroit locker in the back of it, which is an automatic diff locker or a diff unlocker, which we actually covered in our last podcast on this. But, I didn't want the disadvantages of just having a single spinning diff when the diff lock wasn't engaged. And pulling apart diffs and having a look at the wear in them, the majority of wear inside diff locks or any differential comes from single spinning of one wheel. And when the differential action comes in, it actually wears the inside of the diff and you see a fair bit of wear in it. So, I'm putting my money where my mouth is and actually was going for an alternative to the traditional selectable lockers. But now, when this is available, I think I might have something for sale and be purchasing this for my own vehicle.
Awesome. What's the actual design process for something like that? Like, I imagine it'd be fairly complicated to come up with a concept like this. How did Uneek go about it?
So the process is, obviously the first thing is we select what vehicle we're going to do for and what's suitable for having a cap locker built for it. So once we do that, we actually get the factory diff, usually buy them from the wreckers, or we pull it apart out of one of our vehicles, and we set down, design it all up, draw it all up in CAD, go through FEA analysis, so it's actually make sure we build it strong enough before we computer simulate that as well. Then we build some actual units, get them working on the bench, and we've actually engaged RMIT for independent testing. So we actually test to destruction in an independent lab. There's a lot of other testing that goes on for other brands out there. We've all seen that done internally, but we've actually engaged independent, and using a university laboratory is a little bit different than the norm. So we've actually fully load test them to the point of destruction of axles breaking, and you'll actually see on our YouTube channel coming up soon some of that destructive testing as well. And then into the vehicles, and we go and test them under all conditions, so driving on the road and then also out in the bush, make sure they actually work. So we're actually confident to be able to sell them to you, so we can actually get them tested and make sure they engage easily, and then more importantly disengage so you can drive down the road normally as well. Just a very thorough and testing program. So I guess a good 12 months into it, we're actually here about to launch our first Suzuki and our Landcruiser models.
That's awesome, isn't it? And it's interesting about the independent testing, because I know that there's been issues in the past with some four-wheel drive equipment that obviously hasn't been tested to destruction because, and I'm thinking snatch straps would be one thing.
Ooh, that's a can of worms, James. We've spoken about those before.
Well, it's one of those things, people buy them with an expectation that they're going to be able to work, and they don't. That's really quite a big issue, particularly when you're out, trying to do a recovery.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I guess when you think about it, a mechanical thing, so one of the reasons we engage an independent laboratory rather than doing it ourselves, I guess cynics like you and me, James, we might think of the butcher with his thumb on the scales. So just doing your own testing to whatever parameters you set. So one of the things when we sat down at a board level and doing this was say we're going to engage an independent authority who can actually do this, and a university to do that. They've got good testing facilities, and it's actually good to work with these engineers that are almost finishing their courses, going to go out into the big bad world as graduate engineers. And it's actually good to work with them and actually give them some real-world experience. So it's actually putting back in, and hopefully we can get a lot more four-wheel drive capable engineers in the process.
That's awesome. Well, and it's an interesting story about how all of the sort of design work that gets done in Australia, because there's not a lot of new design being done in the four-wheel drive industry. And I know with some of the podcasts we've talked with Robert, because the four-wheel drive industry as a component of the overall for automotive industry is so small, it is difficult to find some of those parts, and a lot of the vehicle manufacturers aren't really, they may build the four-wheel drives, but it's for a very narrow market. And so it's great to be having something that's going to provide those sort of capabilities for people who want to take their vehicles off-road.
Yeah, it's a very good point, James, and it's actually good to see that out there, and keeping the manufacturer in Australia is actually a big thing to that. We can keep our controls in there too, and that patriotic thing as well. And we want to see the best four-wheel drive products built in the world, which we do in Australia, but actually keep them manufacturing here and there, keep the local jobs there as well.
And are there plans to export the cap locker?
Yeah, definitely. I've got quite a few markets already interested in that. As we're going through, we're just going to keep doing that, but we'll actually get them tested in Australia and get our model range built up over some new models. And that's really exciting as well, because we've also, in putting out there, we've actually gone and asked the public what vehicles do they want this for. So we've done a lot of research and we've got a lot of feedback from people, and there's some surprising vehicles that are coming up on our research who have registered for what vehicles they'd like to see a cap locker for. So the next one on the board we've actually got is a Subaru diff lock.
Wow, that's surprising.
It is, and I guess you have a look at that and the rest of the four-wheel drive industry. Now, it's very hard to buy products for Subarus, so there's a lot of smaller operators and there's a lot of club people and enthusiasts that are actually building their own products out there. But obviously a diff lock that goes in there, a little bit more involved and a lot of mechanical aptitudes required there as well, and changing a big part of the vehicle that also drives along in two-wheel drive as well. So it was actually good, and James, you did a really good job of helping us there when we actually set up the Cap Locker website, looking for information and pre-registering people and finding out what vehicles they did there. And both of us were surprised with what results we got out of that, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's and there was a lot of people who were really interested. So I guess the really big question for all of the listeners is, what's next after Subaru?
Well, the next one we've got on there too is the Nissan Patrol LSD, and that's really one vehicle with its part-time four-wheel drive system that when you take the factory LSD out of that, you lose a lot of traction to go to a selectable locker in there as well. So I think that's going to be one of our biggest sellers there as well. We'll get into the Subaru, and then we'll be having a look at some other vehicles out there as well.
Hilux?
Yeah, Hilux is on the board. We've already got that. Subaru and Hilux are running in parallel as well. And obviously the Hilux LSD diff in the back of those is also found in the Prados and FJ Cruisers. So that actually opens up a lot of market. So there's a lot of research into what vehicles have what differential in them and what can cross-do as well. So we can actually, with all our learnings from the Toyota Land Cruiser LSD, we'll be able to transfer that into the Hilux/Prado, the smaller diff as well. So looking forward to getting those out there as well.
That's awesome. So apart from retaining the factory LSD, are there any other benefits of going to a cap locker?
Yeah, definitely, James. So one of our design criteria was to have a minimum of 5mm engagement of the locking ring, which is actually where the diff lock locks and all the force is put through. So we chose 5mm as a target. Some of our competitors only have 3mm, and our Toyota LSD design actually has 6mm full engagement. My maths isn't that good, but that's double of what some of the competitors is.
And so diff locks fail at times?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of failures, and as we covered in the last podcast, a lot of the failures are based on installation or vehicle abuse. I think when it comes down to it, a diff lock has a very hard life, and especially in the competition scene, we see them being used outside of their normal operating parameters with bigger tyres and a lot more horsepower, and also people are pretty rough on them. And I guess that brings to one thing on there. We've seen a lot of failures due to installation of the diff lock. So what we actually do, when we actually assemble the actual unit and put in the box, we actually pre-assemble the bearing, we pre-assemble the seals on there, so there's a lot less chance of someone fitting a diff lock for the first time actually creating the failure point. So by having all that in there, it can bring down the install time, and you're not buying extra bearings or things which you have to do with a lot of opposition products. So I guess their retail price sometimes isn't the true price, all the things you need to buy to assemble. So everything is actually in the box that you require for any competent workshop or anyone that's built diffs before. Everything that comes in the cap locker box is there, no extras, keeps the price down. You're not buying a locker in. We hear this of a lot of people. They might be in the middle of Western Australia or somewhere, get the diff lock freighted in, pull all the vehicle down. As they're going through the instructions with it all on the bench, realise they've got to go and order a bearing. They can't get the bearing till the next weekend. The car's off the road for a week. So everything's actually included in the box, and no hidden surprises. So for what the retail price is, you get everything you need to install the diff lock.
Because that would only be kind of annoying.
Oh, a little bit. You can't imagine the customer service team or the email or the Facebook message that's actually left for them there. So it actually, we think we've come up with a very competitive package, and by installing those there, just brings down the install time and less problems for the user in the end. And the last thing is, going to spend $3,000 to get a diff lock put in your car, and then to have warranty problems with it there as well. We hate that when it happens to us. We've all the team, has run the majority of lockers on the market, and even in our current vehicles, and we're aware of these downfalls.
And I get it is one of the big problems, I think, within the Australian industry and potentially worldwide, just finding people who can install that kind of equipment. It's sadly, we're just not training those people, and it's hard to find good mechanics who can install this gear, isn't it?
Definitely is, and it's hard from a retail point of where you take your vehicle to get worked on. But try doing the hiring process and actually employing these people you need to work on the cars there too. So we actually give a very good training program, and working on giving back to the industry there by training them and making it easier. We're actually putting together some YouTube videos there as well, so you can actually gauge to see if you're capable of doing the install, and also helps your mechanic actually, if you do choose to do it, they can actually see some installs and pick up a few tricks from us on the best way to do it for the most reliable operation.
Is it designed to be something that someone at home could install?
Definitely. If you're experienced with diffs or mechanical stuff, if you can rebuild gearboxes, and we'll actually publish the instructions so you can actually see how it all is all done as well. And one of the benefits by only replacing a portion of the diff, you might not be changing the diff setup. Like in the Landcruiser cap locker, it's only one side of the diff apart, which is the non-crown wheel side. So you're not actually setting up again of having to set up the diff as much, but we tell you how to mark up the diff and check it. Obviously there can be, especially in these second-hand vehicles that have done a lot of kilometres, the diff might still need further work, but if the diff is in excellent operating condition, it can cut down the install time and could possibly be done at home with the right tools and the right experience.
So it sounds definitely like something that I should never try.
Well, James, knowing you for a long time, sorry, mate, it's not a job for you, yeah?
Yeah, I'm well and truly aware of my limitations. So you've stuck with air. It's an air locker. Why is that? Why haven't you gone electronic?
Well, the main thing, like the electromagnetics setup, is a very good setup. It's found in a lot of factory differentials and in the aftermarket ones, but we find to actually get that locking area to work, it takes up a lot of real estate. So if we did that, we could end up with a lot smaller gears in the operation, and possibly couldn't be able to reuse a lot of the factory components. So that takes us away from our design mantra. And one of the other things we've seen in a lot of the electronic lockers, they actually disengage when you reverse. And I don't know about you, James, but most of the time when I need my diff lock, quite often I might be going forward and backwards. So I don't want to lose the diff locker operation and have one wheel spinning again. So, so we've decided air is the reliable way. And also with doing that and pre-assembling everything and bearings and the seals, everything that we put in there, we find it's been very reliable for us. And the majority of people decide on buying the e-lockers after they've had problems with the traditional air-operated lockers. So I'm sure we've overcome those issues, and most effective way. Plus, you also get, for roughly the same price of an electronic locker, you end up with a compressor on board as well, so you can actually pump up tyres, which I haven't seen an electronic locker be able to do yet.
Haha, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that. It sounds like a really good combination, because I know there's a thread on 4x4 Earth about the lack of reliability in one of the brand's lockers. There's a lot of people who've seen that, and it's obviously a significant point of frustration for a huge number of people. That thread's been seen by over 100,000 people. So it's obviously a significant issue in the industry, and so by making it more reliable and easier to fit, because looking at the thread, a lot of it I think comes down to fitting.
Yeah, definitely.
And so making it easier to fit, that's probably going to fix, and more reliable. Generally, one would have thought this should be a really an awesome product. Definitely,
and I think still the biggest advantage is the models that are fitted with the LSD. if you can maintain that LSD or even enhance the LSD as in a Land Cruiser operation and then still have a fully locked diff, best of both worlds.
So the big question, when will they be on sale?
Well, sitting down here, we've got the Melbourne 4-wheel drive show coming up on the 19th to the 21st of August, and they should be shipping out around the same time. So we've got a few pre-sales out there at the moment, actually quite a few of them. I think our first batch is totally sold, and the second batch will be available end of August.
That's awesome. Really exciting. So is there anything else cool that Uneek's working on at the moment?
Well, where do I start with that one? My development board's very full at the moment. We've got a lot of things out there. We've got some new Ranger bull bars, which I've given you a sneak preview today, James. So very close into the vehicle, well styled, I believe. That's my personal opinion. I might be a bit biased there. But really suits the look of the Ranger. A little bit different than other things we've seen out there before. We've got a lot of hidden winch mounts coming out. So you still get the benefits of having a bull bar, but and protecting the front of the vehicle and having winch and driving light mounts and tow hooks, most importantly, but keeping all behind the standard bumper.
That's awesome. We should, if you've got some photos, we can put them up in the podcast show notes. Of some of the gear that's coming up, yeah. Yeah,
so lots of things coming out there. And then, as we said, Subaru lockers and Nissan Patrol LSD lockers, and the Toyota Hilux / Prado lockers is coming out very soon behind those. So by the end of the year, we'll probably have 5 or 6 fitments of cap locker and many more to come next year.
That's awesome. Well, good work, because I think it's always exciting to hear a story of an Australian manufacturing company, well, design and manufacturing, so actually doing the design. And, you know, it's a colourful industry, the four-wheel drive industry, as far as design goes, because I think it's a fairly rare skill to be able to design four-wheel drive components, and there's a lot of, you know, cheap knockoffs where literally people are copying this stuff. So it's great to have a company in Australia that's got the capability to be able to design bull bars and something complicated like a locker. And on top of that, they're not shipping it offshore. It's actually getting built in Australia. So it's Australian jobs. It's good for the economy. And it's great for four-wheel drivers because they're getting a product that's designed and built by four-wheel drivers for four-wheel drivers. So, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, James, I was just into one other thing there. We'll reiterate on that again. As we did in this cap locker, and we're asking all the time on our Facebook page and out there as well, we're actually asking the Australian consumer what they actually want, what design styles they want, what vehicles they want, and we'll actually listen to the market and actually build what they want as well as what we want.
Which I think is a fairly rare approach to action, rather than people who are designing stuff. And it's interesting talking to some of the people. There's people designing four-wheel drive gear that don't go four-wheel driving, and I just think that it's got to be difficult to be able to do that. To A, get, you know, the aesthetics, the styling right, but B, to be able to actually understand what it's like to, you know, stand in a river that's flowing, trying to winch out, or how you're going to use a snatch strap, all of those sort of things. It's much better when you've got the people who are doing it, who understand how it's going to be used, and more importantly, reaching out to the customers to see what it is that they want.
Yeah, last thing you want to see is a tow point right under the vehicle that you can't reach when you're stuck. You know, just simple things like that unfortunately we see out there. The engineering principles behind everything and where they're mounted, you know, that's great, but you've also got to put that practical use back onto it as well. It's no use having the best mousetrap if you can't use it while you're out there.
Yeah, and that's a good point about recovery points, because I've seen that, you know, someone who's stuck and it's like, oh, holy crap, you can't actually get to the recovery point. That's not really that useful, really.
Yeah, concur with that, James. So, look at the other thing I didn't cover before, we've got a whole range of rear bars with integrated tow bars coming out. Also some rear winch mounts coming out for these dual cab utes, like we already do for the GU Patrol and the Jeep Wrangler and a few other vehicles. So you'll start seeing some dual cabs out there with some winches out on the back.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jason. I'll include some information on the show notes where people can get more information about the cap locker, because it is a really exciting product, and I know there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of interest, and I'm sure they're going to sell like hotcakes. So, yeah, good work, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, James.
So what a really interesting story. I love talking to Australian manufacturers. It's a really hard gig to do in Australia. And wherever possible, I think that we should support Australian businesses, because at the end of the day, it's more economic prosperity for all of us. And when they're coming out with innovative and exciting products, all the more the better. So that's it. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. It really does make a big difference on the rankings. The podcast is going really, really well. I've been really surprised. We're up to 70,000 downloads, and it just seems to be climbing every month, more and more downloads. So thank you very much for those who have left a review. Thank you for everyone who's downloaded the podcast as well. All of the numbers count. Have a think also about what you would like to hear on the podcast. So I'll leave a link to that. We've got a thread going. I'm really keen to hear from the kind of people you want to hear us interview, and the kind of topics that you want to hear us talk about as well. So there's lots to talk about. There's lots to see and do out when we go four-wheel driving, and that's what this podcast is all about. So hopefully I will see you out on the tracks one day. Bye.
4x4earth.com is used by over 200,000 people every month to find great tracks, organise trips, and find out how to better enjoy exploring the great outdoors. There's over 1,000 tracks and 300 campsites ready for you to explore. So check out 4x4earth.com today and sign up to get access to the track information, ask questions, and meet other 4x4 Earthers. Membership is completely free. If you're looking for a good route, check out 4x4earth.com today.